Now, our final witness for the day is anonymous and will be known as Mrs. A.P. In her case, the order is as follows. The name and address of witness W1011, that's Mrs. A.P. to you and me, and any identifying information, such as the witness's image or a description of their appearance, cannot be disclosed or published in any form unless express permission is given by me or by the solicitor to the inquiry acting on my behalf. Witness W1011 must be referred to only as Mrs. A.P. This order remains in force for the duration of the inquiry and at all times thereafter, unless otherwise ordered, and I may vary or revoke the order by making a further order during the course of the inquiry. With that protection, Mrs. A.P., please come forward.
Mrs. A.P., your full name is known to the inquiry. Could you please repeat after me? I do solemnly, sincerely,
I do solemnly, sincerely,
and truly declare and affirm
and truly declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
You have a bleeding disorder known as factor 11 deficiency,
Yes, that's true.
and that's sometimes also known as Rosenthal syndrome or haemophilia C.
Yes,
And it's a rare clotting disorder.
yeah, very rare.
You say in your statement that the beginning of your difficulties was 1978.
That's right, yes.
You were diagnosed with ulcerative colitis and admitted to the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital.
That's right.
And in the course of the treatment you received there, you received blood transfusions and fresh frozen plasma.
Yes.
It was then in September of 1980 that you required a further admission to hospital for surgery.
That's right, yeah.
And what happened then?
During the surgery went well, but after the surgery, I started to bleed profusely. There was drains and blood was just coming out. I obviously was seriously ill at that point, and I woke up in dreadful pain to the consultant, the surgeon, pumping blood into my arms and telling me that I was bleeding, and it was extremely painful because it was just literally being pumped in. They told me that they thought there was something wrong with my clotting. No one knew at that time what it was.
And you say in your statement you required units of blood, and you also received either factor VIII concentrate or cryoprecipitate, you're not sure which.
Yes, they told me that I needed factor VIII, and that because it was some kind of bleeding disorder, clotting disorder, but they didn't know what it was, that factor VIII should stop the bleeding, so that they would give me that. And I knew, I'd heard about factor VIII before. I didn't think I was a haemophiliac, but I knew about factor VIII because I grew up with a haemophiliac young man, so I knew about it.
And your recollection is that there were significant volumes, is the way you've put it, of blood and blood products administered to you in the course of that admission to hospital.
Yes.
You then describe being given subsequently, not during that admission but later on, fresh frozen plasma in anticipation of surgery for an abscess.
Yes.
The surgery itself did not proceed.
That's right.
But you'd had the fresh frozen plasma. Can you recall which year that was?
That would have been probably, well, it was soon after, within weeks of my surgery. It was because of the bleeding that I'd had. It had all been into the pelvic cavity, and so it had caused this abscess. And in order to cure it, they wanted to operate, but they couldn't get my bloods correct.
And this had taken place at University College Hospital, London?
Yes.
And then you developed an allergic reaction to the fresh frozen plasma,
Yes.
itchiness, swollen eyes, and then anaphylactic shock.
Yes, but that wasn't because of the abscess. What happened was after they were trying to cure this abscess and they just couldn't get rid of it because my bloods weren't right. So they said, what we need to do now is to bring you in and we'll start to see what we can do to make your bloods, your homeostasis, to achieve homeostasis. So by then I was actually well. The abscess actually was managed to be cured by antibiotics and some alternative therapies, but I was called in as a day patient and was given FFP, I think it was mostly that, and then they were monitoring my bloods, and during that time I had anaphylactic shock.
Now you transferred, I'm not sure of the exact year, maybe you recall, but it doesn't matter, to the care of the Royal Free Hospital.
Yes.
And you came under the care of Dr. Kernoff.
That's right, yeah.
And this was because of the unusual and rare blood clotting disorder that you
Yes.
had, the factor 11 deficiency. In 1987, by which time you were married and hoping to start a family, you were referred, still within the Royal Free, for IVF treatment.
That's right, yeah.
I think, in fact, that you decided you wanted to undertake the treatment elsewhere
That
under
came
Professor
afterwards.
Winston.
That came afterwards. We'd had a couple of cycles at the Royal Free that weren't successful and they were a bit complicated. I had hyperstimulation of my ovaries and became quite unwell. And it was the very early days of IVF at that time. And I just wanted to go to the best place. And there wasn't NHS treatment. We were paying. So I didn't want to keep going through treatment unnecessarily. So I opted to go to the Hammersmith Hospital where Professor Winston was working.
In total, you underwent 8 or more IVF attempts.
Right, yeah.
And you say in your statement that all of the IVF cycles that you underwent required clotting treatments.
Yeah.
By that time with factor concentrate.
Yes, factor 11.
Factor 11 concentrate. It was after around 7 of those IVF cycles that a casual comment was made to you by a doctor. Can you recall what that comment was?
Yes, I was up there for just some blood tests in the morning. Every morning for IVF you used to have to go up and have your hormones done. And it was a junior doctor said to me just very casually, well, you've had a lot of blood products in your life, haven't you? Have you thought about getting tested for, because there's a lot of viruses and infections out there and maybe, you're trying for a baby, you ought to be tested. Why don't you go along to the Royal Free, because I was under the haematologist there, and asked to be tested? I didn't think much of it at the time, so I went on the next routine appointment to the Royal Free and asked, and they said okay. And then I didn't really hear anything much more about it until it was probably my next follow-up appointment, probably a year later, that I then found out I had hepatitis C.
Prior to that casual comment from the doctor during one of your IVF cycles, had anyone ever given you any advice or warning about risks of infection associated with blood or blood products?
No, and I think had they, particularly when I was going through we'll try and see what we can do to improve your homeostasis, if they'd told me there'd been a risk, I wouldn't have had it because I was well by then. And the illness that I'd had been cured, and there was no reason for me to really start worrying about what if. I was a 20-year-old woman, and I was told I was cured, so I wouldn't have gone through it.
Now, you describe in your statement in 1995 a routine consultation with your consultant haematologist at the Royal Free, who by then was Dr. Christine Lee.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that consultation?
I went in and we were just talking about the factor 11 deficiency and had I had any bleeds, had I had any problems, which I hadn't because I never knew about it till I was 20. I don't spontaneously bleed. I don't have any problems with it. And she said, by the way, you do know that you've got hepatitis C, don't you? And I didn't know that I had hepatitis C. And she said, oh, yes, it's a very serious illness. I can give you a leaflet on it, and you'll go away and you can think about it. And I'd said, but I can't have anything like that. This is about, I think it was about 15 years later, so 13, 15 years later. that can't happen. I feel okay. I feel all right. And she said, I remember her saying this specifically, oh, you could be walking around with half a liver and not know about it. And at this point, we don't know if you're ill or not ill. You need to have some tests. So I had some tests and had to wait.
And just before we get to the tests, you talk about the delivery of the diagnosis by Professor Lee initially being in a very matter-of-fact manner. You questioned the diagnosis and you got this blunt result was you could have severe liver damage.
Yeah,
People
and
do
here's a
without
leaflet,
knowing about
by
it.
the way. Here's a leaflet that had all about cirrhosis, cancer, what could happen. It was like receiving a terminal illness diagnosis, just like that. And I was on my own.
And you described it very vividly in your statement. You say it was like taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut in terms of the manner in which the diagnosis explanation was delivered.
Yeah, it felt like that.
And you also say you left in a state of emotional turmoil.
Yes, I did.
Now you had tests in relation to your liver, and what was the upshot of those tests?
I believe that there was very minor changes in my liver function, but there was nothing significant. So I didn't have half a liver functioning. I was okay, and I think that the test came out that it was a particular genotype or some kind of particular type of hepatitis C that may be susceptible to treatment.
And you were advised, as I understand your statement, by Professor Lee to embark upon a course of treatment.
Yes.
So although there was no serious damage to your liver, she suggested to you that you try the treatment of pegylated interferon and ribavirin.
Yes.
Did you know what stage that treatment was at? Can you recall?
Oh, it was a trial. I think it's one of the first trials that there was. So yeah, I think I was one of the first people to have it. It was a year-long treatment. I was told I have to stay on it a year, no matter what. And it was a ribavirin and interferon.
And can you recall whether you were told about potential side effects?
I was told I might get flu-like symptoms, and to take paracetamol on the nights that I had the injections.
What, in fact, was that year-long treatment on interferon and ribavirin like?
Oh, it was hell. It was absolute hell. It was right that I did have flu-like symptoms on the nights of the injections, but I was extremely tired throughout the whole time. I lost my hair, it went very, very thin. I became very thin. I lost weight. I had mouth ulcers. I had cracking of my skin around my mouth. My fingers cracked, was dry and cracked, so that I couldn't hold on to things. I was just in quite a mess, really, with it.
And you also talk about night sweats,
Yeah.
aches, pains, disturbed sleep,
Yes.
and severity of itching.
Yeah.
And your mood changed. You became intolerant and depressed at times.
Bad-tempered, moody, very low in spirits, really tearful a lot of the time. And just, I felt like I was trudging through each day and couldn't wait for it to finish. But I was told very early on, within 3 months, the viral load had come down to virtually nil. So I was motivated to continue, but it was very hard. But there was no stopping. It had to continue for another 9 months.
What was the outcome of the treatment in terms of the virus?
I cleared the virus.
But you've said in your statement you continued to feel the ill effects of the
Yes.
treatment for a prolonged period afterwards.
Yeah. It took around about 6 to 12 months for me to get anywhere near to feeling normal. But I would say that I've never felt completely normal since. I'm much more tired than I remember being, and I don't sleep well. The nights, a year long of not sleeping took its toll. I didn't sleep, and I still don't sleep. And I never was really able to resume the activities to the level that I did before.
We'll come on to your work in a moment, but in terms of the IVF treatment you've been undergoing, the Hammersmith Hospital said that it was time to bring an end to that.
It seemed to happen very quickly after the diagnosis, the hepatitis C. Up to that point, they were talking about new treatments, new things coming on. Maybe you'd be suitable for this trial of this way of doing IVF or whatever. And it seemed to be that very quickly. It is a bit woolly because it was such a period of shock and turmoil, but it was very soon after. Suddenly we were called. We saw a doctor we'd never met before, and he talked very quietly in a sort of a whisper almost at me, and sort of whispered to me. It was like coming to an end, and we don't think we can help you anymore. But no real reason was given.
And you don't know, but you're left with the suspicion that the diagnosis of hepatitis C may have been a factor in relation to that. Now, you had, in fact, as well as the IVF process, been going through the process of being approved as potential adopters.
Yes.
And when you had the diagnosis of hepatitis C and you knew that you were going to be embarking upon this treatment, you decided that you would concentrate your focus and your energies on the adoption process.
That's right. Yes.
And you were able to adopt.
Yes.
2 children.
Yeah.
But the diagnosis, the infection and the treatment and its side effects took its toll on your abilities to practically parent your children in those early years. What can you tell us about that?
It was for us, the timing of everything was just so difficult because literally at the 3 months all clear and 9 months to go of treatment, we got the phone call from social services to say, oh, lucky you, we have 2 children of age 2 years old. It's a brother and sister, but they're both born in the same year. They're not twins, but they're born in the same year. 2 children for you. And you've been put forward to be the parents for them. And we think, oh, okay, great. I mean, it was great, wonderful. But I was feeling so awful, and I had such a long way to go for treatment. So my husband had to reduce his working hours. He was working in a bank, and he reduced down his hours of work with permission because we knew I wouldn't be able to do it on my own. Took time off work first and then went part-time. And my mum helped, and we together had to work. But I was having real problems because my hands were really sore, and just touching nappies was like having electric shocks. The friction, it was like electric shocks going on my hand. So they gave me gloves at the hospital to wear to help. I had difficulty cuddling the children. I couldn't bath the children, so my husband did that. I had to have a lot of practical help, and all the time I had to be happy-clappy that everything was going well, because obviously there was a worry that social services would come in and take the children away. And my focus really was get through this treatment, get well, don't let them take the children away.
And you describe your life at that time as being on a trajectory, but it wasn't an upward trajectory, a downward one associated with the side effects of the treatment concerned.
It was really hard. I don't know how I did it. I felt permanently dizzy. It was obviously 2 young children, 2 years old. It's like, 2 toddlers at the same time. They were running around all over the place. I couldn't run after them. And I was just trying my best. And I remember looking forward to Teletubbies coming on, so anything to make them stop and watch the television. Or when they wouldn't go to sleep, I'd literally stick them in the car and go driving for miles to just try and get them to sleep because I couldn't cope with them.
And I think one of the practicalities was you were going to hospital appointments,
Yes.
hour and a half each way, and you had often to bring the children with you.
I had to every time bring the children with me.
You've also described in your statement in relation to the trial, you recall people falling away from the trial because they couldn't cope with the side effects. And you wonder how many of those people are still alive.
Yeah, some of them were very, very sick. I mean, I think they were very sick to begin with when we went on the trial. And each week in the beginning, there was quite a number of us, and we all used to turn up on the same day. We were all monitored, and we all went to get our drugs because they were... obviously, they weren't run-of-the-mill drugs. They would dispense specially for us. And gradually, there was fewer and fewer of us turning up at each appointment. And some people would say to me, "Oh, I've stopped because I'm not getting better. Nothing's happening for me." And others would say, "I just feel too ill. I can't carry on." And I was reasonably young. Some were older than me. But yeah, I think quite a few have probably died.
And because of the combined effects of the infection, the treatment, the side effects, and you had to make your priority these two
Yeah.
young children you were adopting, you had to significantly scale back your work. You'd run a business with a partner.
Yes.
You went first of all part-time, but then your partner ended up having to take over effectively full-time. And you ended up having to sell the business for very little.
Yeah.
And it was an acrimonious end to a business.
It was, yeah. I work in health, and at the time, it was a very innovative way. It was a time when local authorities were contracting out a lot of their services, and we were picking up waiting lists from local authorities and housing associations and the health service. And we had a team of other healthcare professionals working with us. And I was doing assessments, had been before the treatment, going out doing assessments, employing other people, negotiating contracts. And it was a really busy and flourishing business between the two of us. And it was new and it was innovative. And I also was starting to be asked to be an expert witness in my particular field of expertise. And so we were really doing well for the time. And then once the treatment started, it was very clear that I couldn't carry on with it. So in the early days of treatment, this was before the children came, my business partner took over. I did very little. He took over, and it was an expectation that I would go back. Then the children came. There was no way I could go back. So, he basically bought me out.
And you were eventually able to return to part-time work, but you say in your statement you never got back to where you'd previously been.
No, I could never gone back to part-time work, partly because of the lack of sleep, the poor sleep pattern, and I don't think my concentration was ever quite as good. I still was able to work as an expert witness, and I did really well as an expert witness, but it wasn't anywhere near to the level that my colleagues are doing. I didn't take the number of cases that other people were taking, and I used to have periods where I'd stop taking cases so I could rest and have rest periods before I start again. So I had quite a few career breaks.
And you say in your statement you ended up retiring at 57, and you directly attribute that to the hepatitis C or the treatment for the hepatitis C.
I'm sure of it, because many of my colleagues are still working today. My ex-business partner has still got his business. I was offered, after my other business finished, I was offered a partnership in an expert witness company with someone, and that company's still going, and that's just been bought out for several £1 million. But I couldn't, because I wasn't well enough, I couldn't go in with her.
You continue to be under the care of the Royal Free in terms of your blood clotting disorder.
Yeah.
So you have, not very often, but I think it's each year you either have a telephone appointment or an in-person appointment with a haematologist. But what, if any, ongoing monitoring of your liver have you been offered?
None at all. And when this inquiry started, it came into my knowledge that people who have cleared the virus are not necessarily cured totally, and that there have been some cases of liver cancer. And I put that to the hospital, the Royal Free that I'm under, and asked if I could be tested, to which they said, no, there's no need. You have cleared the virus, therefore, as far as we're concerned, you don't need to be followed up and monitored for anything to do with hepatitis. So I went to my GP, I told her, she did some blood tests, and actually there is an anomaly with my alpha-fetoprotein. It's not mega high, but it's higher than it should be. So I am now having to be monitored. But my GP's doing it because the Royal Free, even though they know this, have refused to refer me.
You now have a lack of trust in doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been compounded, I think, by the fact that many of your medical records have been lost.
Yes.
What have you been told about your records?
In the early 90s, I was approached by an American law company after, I don't know how they got my number or my name, but they did, and said there was a test case going on in America about tainted blood. Did I want to be part of it? Which I said yes, I would. So I tried to get my medical records. Part of that was you had to have your medical records. And I wrote to my GP, I wrote to the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital, I wrote to UCH to get my notes. The Royal London Homeopathic Hospital wrote back and said there was no record of me either under my maiden name, because I wasn't married when I was treated there, or my married name. There's no record of me at all. The UCH said, wrote back to me and said, all of your notes have been filed on a digital data system, which is no longer working and can't be, so your notes cannot be retrieved and won't be retrieved. And I've tried again, and it's the same answer. And my GP, I think, has also got a paucity of notes.
And so you're not able to identify which of the various treatments or products that you received are the products that infected you with hepatitis C?
No, although I have received lists of blood products from the transfusion service. You know, when the CJD alert came out, I received a list of blood products, which I've been told by the Royal Free that none of those are on the affected list.
In terms of VCJD?
VCJD, but I don't know which ones for the hepatitis.
Those are the questions I have for you. I'm just going to ask your solicitor whether she's got any further questions to suggest. No, nothing further. But is there anything else that you would like to say?
No, I think from, well, one of the things I suppose I would like to say is that, like a lot of people, this has been really hard because, for me in particular, I've had to keep a lid on this for years and years and years. It's only now that we're talking about it. For me, the implication of saying anything about this could have meant that I would have lost my children. It meant that I couldn't go on with IVF. It meant that I couldn't work, or that job opportunities were denied to me, because I think it would have been very hard for me to have gone back into the health service if I said I was hepatitis C positive. It's had so many implications that over the years I just don't talk about it. I haven't talked about it, just really just plodded on and tried not to think about it, really. And this has really brought up a lot of stuff for me, and I just hope, really, I want to thank for the inquiry for coming forward and doing this, because I think hopefully it will give us some closure, give us some answers, hopefully, to what happened. Because I can't believe that we were given these products and we just were ignored for many years. People somewhere out there knew what they were doing and what was happening. And I went on about 15 years trying for a baby, potentially infecting my husband, potentially infecting any babies that I might have had. And this was allowed to happen. And who allowed that to happen? And it bugs me. It really bugs me that this has happened. And, you know, now it's hopefully we can find out. I hope we find out.
Thank you. Sir Brian.
Well, thank you. As you probably realised, it's very different being an expert witness from giving evidence about yourself.
Yeah.
And particularly when what you're describing, you're trying to describe and convey, is something which I can very well understand, which is how you manage on Earth to care for two-year-old children at the same time as having the after effects, the side effects of treatment.
Yeah.
And a husband who has to be at work as much as he can be. Plus, you added at the end of that the fears that you had that everything might suddenly be taken away from you, everything that was good, if you so much as let it slip that you had the disease. So it's I really have to thank you for coming to talk as much as you have about what happened to you.
Thank you.
Well, I think last week I said we would, what was happening tomorrow. Well, I shan't say that on this Friday. We have nothing, of course, next week because it is half term. But we do start again, do we not, on the Monday this time, the week after?
We do. We start on Monday, the 28th of October, and we are sitting all 5 days that week to accommodate as many witnesses as we are reasonably able to in the course of the week.
And can you tell us who we're going to hear from?
I can. We will be hearing from Alan Burgess and Sarah Adams, Nicola Jones, Stuart Gregg, and an anonymous witness on the first day.
That will start at 10 o'clock. So thank you for your attendance, and those of you who come, see you then.